Hello, everybody. This is John Arnold, J. Arnold and Associates, and we are back for another podcast. And joining me, as usual, is my partner in podcast crime, Chris. Chris Fine. Come on down and say hello.
Hi, John. Hi, everybody. Good to be back.
Yeah, so we are we're also doing our podcast as we do every month as part of my newsletter, but also we're kind of getting into a bit of a groove here with how we do these things, and we're also doing a bit of branding, and we're working on a new name for our podcast series, right, Chris? I think we're going to be calling it Watch This Space.
Well, that's the idea we've been considering.
Yeah, yeah, and just as a way for people to know that when they have our podcasts on tap to listen to, that, we're talking about what's coming and what we're seeing, and we're often seeing things that aren't quite in the marketplace yet. So we're definitely coming out of that mode from the week now that's closing. We're recording just a day after finishing up with the Voice Summit 2019 event in Newark, New Jersey. And Chris and I were attending for the first time. This is, I think, the second iteration of this event, and they claim to be the world's largest voice-only event. And whether that's true or not, we don't know, but they had a pretty good sized crowd, and it was held at the NJIT, which was new to me, but it's the New Jersey Institute of Technology. And I think it's a pretty appropriate setting for such a nascent space, but one where there's just so much going on, huh, Chris?
That's right, John. And it's very gratifying to see how much Newark has revived, especially that area, and how much exciting tech and investment and other things are happening there. The conference is interesting too. It's a pretty large conference, and it's also about that areas of voice that are very different from traditional areas, right, John? I mean, a voice conference, it would have always been things like telephony and conference calling and maybe some AV and stuff like that. And now it's all about speech recognition and synthesis and AI and topics related to that.
Yeah, this is one of the things that stuck out to me right away is telephony is not spoken here. There is zero reference from what we saw to phones, to phone systems. The closest thing would be your mobile device, but the last thing you're doing on that thing is talking. This is all about data, and this world is just, as you said, Chris, it's so different from what we look at in collaboration and in the IT world. Very consumer focused, very brand focused. So it's of the moment for sure with people who love digital content and digital marketing. But underlying all this is pretty cool technology that's getting good enough now to have some interesting use cases. Whether these companies thrive as businesses remains to be seen, but I think just the scope of innovation here is really broad, and it just shows you when people jump on a technology and start coming up with new applications, it's pretty exciting to see kind of the energy that's going into this space.
I agree, and I think it's just fascinating to see voice emerge more and more as a medium as well as an interface. So it's not just the proverbial Alexa or Siri, but of course that's part of it. There are so many other aspects. I was so interested to see companies that use speech as a medium, for example, for storytelling and sort of outgrowths of podcasts and new types of mass media as well as person to person and groups. It's just fascinating.
Yeah, yeah, and I think there were a couple of presentations that gave a bit of a longer term perspective on how technology evolutions come. And, this is kind of an extension of other kind of centric worlds where, going back maybe before mobile times, but, for a long time, the phone system in the workplace was, our world was very telephony phone centric, for getting things done. Then mobile came along, and of course we had PC centric with a browser, and then mobile has come along, and now we've become mobile centric or mobile first. But now this the real subtle thing here is they talk about being voice first. And when voice becomes the center of everything, not these other things, you realize there's a whole world of applications here that don't involve any of those things. You don't need a computer. You don't need a mobile phone. You don't need a desk phone to use voice in all of these ways. And this starts taking us into new territory where, yes, if the Alexa is kind of like the touchstone, it's something you can see and feel and look at and say, that's AI and voice. But we're going to eventually get to this stage where they talk about ambient interfaces, where you can be talking to the wall, talking to the mirror, talking to just, an inanimate object that happens to be able to connect to the internet and engage with you, and all of a sudden your coffee table is talking to you, or your fridge, right?
Exactly. That's a whole area. And another area that I thought was fascinating. Again, sometimes you go to a conference and you think, well, I kind of know what this world is. And then the world turns out to be bigger than you think. The market, the ecosystem, the opportunity. And one area that I thought was really fascinating was the increasing presence of voice as a fully translatable medium, which means it's just data. And
Mm-hmm.
data can then be analyzed and parsed and used for all kinds of different things. So there were companies that, for example, would process data derived from contact center interfaces and then use that to improve the relation with the customer. And there were other applications that would tie in voice data to visual data. And so the world really changes when the voice recognition gets good enough that and the AI behind it gets good enough to derive inference and meaning and emotion and all these other things that are below the surface to make it fully translatable into bits and bytes that are then usable like any other data, if that makes any sense. Effectively translates it to text, but sort of rich text that also has attributes of emotion and stress and tone and individual speaker characteristics and things like that. So when you start to factor that in, that gets really interesting for the enterprise, right?
Yeah, yeah. And we're, for our audience, we are filtering all this through the lens of digital immigrants, right? So, the people in this audience is very developer heavy, certainly trending on the younger side for sure. Their relationship with voice and other technologies it's going to be a very different mix to what we have, been through over the past, couple of decades. So for, Chris and I, we go back to the earliest days of Jeff Pulver and his Vaughn event. And I think we remember like it was yesterday, Chris, right? Kind of the energy, the karma, the vibe, the excitement around VoIP being such a disruptive force at the time. And because it was so disruptive, it got the attention of everybody. So all the biggest players were there. And don't you think it had a lot of the same kind of look and feel to that early kind of day event feel?
Yes, Vaughn and other conferences that I've been to. This year, I was able to drop by briefly last year. I knew it was the first year for you there, and the first year we were both there, but I think it's about twice as big this year. And there was a much bigger exhibit space, which is again characteristic of a growing system of connected markets and products and technologies, which this didn't used to be. This used to be more nichey, with a big niche being the kind of voice IO, Alexa, Siri kind of world. But with all these connecting pieces now coming together, and especially the addition of real AI at various stages of it, it's
Mm-hmm.
going to grow really rapidly. If you look at where this started, it was kind of just purely about the technology, just like VoIP was, and other things have been in the day, web, everything that changes in technology. But now the pieces are coming together to form a much bigger picture.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. So let's talk a bit about some of the sessions that stood out for us. So it was VJ, and he is the CEO of Pindrop, a company that was new to me. And he gave a really great talk about basically the challenges of authenticating voice in this environment with AI, and just how good it is sounding when it's done right, but also because of that, it's very easy for a lot of misrepresentation and the vulnerabilities you get when you're not careful about authenticating access using voice.
That was mine. That was my vote too. Although there were a lot of other interesting ones, I thought that nailed the existing challenge with this that has to be solved.
Yeah, I thought the presentation, he made it very kind of real and very understandable, kind of setting things up when you start from the premise that this technology is very sexy, it's engaging, the potential is wonderful, so you just kind of jump into it and go with it. But then at the same time, it's like a lot of things when we, our identity and our privacy starts to get compromised. By the time you realize you've kind of given a lot of it away, it's too late. Some of the examples he used, the one he used about Trump, for example, remember, Chris? He said just with a few voice samples, they can create Trump making all kinds of proclamations of war and aggression and all this stuff, and you would think it was real.
Yeah, I mean, that's the deep fake technology, which is a great worry in general. But
Yeah.
it's easier. It's pretty easy now to fake both voice and picture together, and together they're pretty convincing.
Yeah, and I wish I took a photo. Remember when we went to see him on the show floor, they had this side-by-side video of an actor and what was her name? Jennifer Lawrence, the actress. And it was a guy, but he looked like Jennifer Lawrence. He was dressed exactly the same as her, and they were side-by-side video, and I'm sure they were talking, but he was mimicking every move of hers perfectly on cue. So it's like watching two twins going back and forth. But it just shows you how you can use video to approximate, because it's the body language, it's really hard to get. But when you can get that down, you look authentic. You look like it's the real thing, and all of a sudden, whatever you say, it becomes very believable.
Well, I think, what's interesting is I think that there's a huge opportunity to develop a system of watermarking or distinctive, probably non-audible pieces that go into audio but mark it. That's done sometimes in music, but I don't think as sophisticated a way as it needs to be done. It's called steganography, right? It's like embedding messages in pictures where you can't see them. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that that's going to be part of the security picture. I also think there needs to be some sort of a relative of PKI, some kind of certificating system that also will go with it. So long run, this is going to be a really epidemic problem, but there may be a way where genuine content can be marked as such, or AIs may be able to tell the difference. That may be another thing where today you have a firewall, tomorrow you have an agent that can tell a fake from a real. I mean, I could see that.
Yeah. And again, it's an example of, again, when the digital native market becomes kind of the focus of all of this, I just worry that it will be so tempting and just, for them just to go into this without asking a lot of questions. And the reason I say that is there was a session, Chris, I don't think you saw. It was presenting some research, sponsored by NPR actually, and a company called Edison Research, and they shared some top line findings. And I'm going to be doing some separate write-ups about this, but what I found fascinating is it's basically about the, endpoints, the smart speaker marketplace. And a couple of things that were really interesting one was the fact that I think he said 30% of homes have more than one of these. In fact, they have more than three. And the point he was making was the research shows that these devices are not just, one thing you put on your dining room table, but they're commonly turning up in many parts of your home now. And it's going to become a very pervasive thing, I think, faster than we realize. So People just don't have it like we used to have one phone in the home, then we had 2 or 3 phones, but now it's going to be like this with these devices. And I think that's an interesting trend, is just to show how quickly it's being adopted and how pervasive this could become in our day-to-day lives.
Well, the good side of it is so compelling that it could easily, as has happened in the past, often with tech, blow past the bad side.
Mm-hmm.
And there may or may not be enough consideration. But to your point about the home, and I think this is going to be true for businesses too, ultimately, certain builders, at least in the US, are building this stuff literally into new homes and apartments. It's becoming part of home automation. It's becoming
Mm-hmm.
almost like a light switch. And what one or two of the builders are doing now, the big public, large scale multifamily unit builders and home builders, is they'll put this in and then hire somebody like the Geek Squad to be the on-site activator, right, or a contractor. So the homeowner can choose to turn this on or not.
Mm-hmm.
And if they do, there's like a subscription for service or an activation fee. And somebody, Best Buy or whoever the local contractor is, will send a trainer over to get everything set up and configured for that individual or family and get all the devices connected and train them how to use it.
Mm-hmm.
So, when I look 10 or 15 years down the road, maybe less, I just see this being pervasive. And your point about digital natives is completely correct, but I believe this is also going to become pervasive with older people.
I totally agree. There was a
It's
great,
so useful.
yeah, there was a really good video, I thought, was later in the show. Yes, it was showing an old man sitting alone in his home, and just all of a sudden, much like TV used to be, having that device in his home, he could all of a sudden talk and engage with people. I mean, yes, it may be a digital assistant, but he could get a lot of things done. And all of a sudden he felt a little more connected to his world. And I think there's going to be a lot of opportunity, disabled people who, just people who can't get out of their homes very easily. This could be a real boon. I also want to just touch on what I was saying going into this when I cited that research, coming back to the earlier stuff about authentication. Another very interesting finding from that research was this, that the top 3 reasons for people who don't want to have these devices in their homes were concerns about that the devices are going to be listening in on them and that the government's going to eavesdrop on your conversations. I mean, genuine concerns that are real about hackers getting into your home and your privacy. Well, when they profiled users, adopters of these devices in the home, those were also their same concerns. So in other words, even though they have those concerns about privacy, they still use them. So they also had a vignette of some interviews of customers to asking their feelings about this. Do they worry about it? And they just they were like, man in the street interviews, but they were all reacting about the same way. They said, well, what are they going to find? This isn't really that big a deal. So I think there is a bit of a naivete going into this, that there's going to be inherent trust of these devices in the home, and the habits will get formed and bonded so quickly that I think it's going to be very hard to go back, when you have these devices so, as you say, pervasive. And we didn't even talk about the car, where apparently there are 1 million pre-orders now for Alexa Auto. I mean, people they can't get this stuff fast enough now that they're kind of hooked on it.
Well, the car is a great paradigm for all of this, right? Where here's a case where it totally makes sense, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
this is one of those areas, like people who may be impaired in some way or another from using the traditional keyboards and screens type of I/O to computers. Everybody's that way when they're in a car. And this is a case where if you could use a voice interface in a car, you would be safer. You would be much more enabled to be able to access information in a way that was less intrusive. So I'm not usually a bubbly, positive person about more and more technology everywhere, but I actually think in cars that is a killer app for this kind of technology.
Yeah, I totally agree. And like a lot of things that I certainly rant on a lot about is technology will succeed where the use cases are clear. And that's a perfect use case. When it makes sense, it flies. But when you've got to keep selling people and convincing them it's a good idea, it's a little tougher. But I think those, you only need a few good ones, as you say, to make them killer apps. And all of a sudden, everything else starts to make sense pretty fast. So we're on time now, Chris, so we gotta wrap
Okay.
up. But we have, as you can see, we're just really tip of the iceberg of things we could be talking about. And it's a great space. So we've got more, we'll be looking at this in more ways for sure. So stay tuned. All right, Chris. So, a quick last thought.
Well, I agree. Stay tuned. Watch this space, as it were. I think everybody who might be listening to us needs to think about this space and this technology. It's not just it's interesting; it really is going to become pervasive, and there are many implications to it.
For sure, for sure. And as I mentioned before, I've got a post coming out very soon, early next week, hopefully, and some photos up on my blog, and there'll be more to come for sure. So we both have, we're not done yet with this one, but really glad we got a chance to get this done while we're in the moment. So thanks everyone for listening to another podcast here. And yes, watch this space, and we'll be back with you very soon with our next podcast. Thank you for listening. Over and out.
Thanks, everyone.